Welcome back to the Culture Codex podcast. Today we are joined by Representative Allison Russo. Allison, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Yeah, so we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to go into, I guess, your experience in the state legislature, your campaign for Secretary of State, and some general stuff about local politics here in Ohio. So I just thought the best thing to do is to start out by discussing your background and how you got into public service. So.
Yeah, start from the beginning. Well, I always call myself the accidental politician. I never planned to run for office. I wasn't, I talked to a lot of college students and high school students, and many of them know they want to work in politics. They know they want to be in public service. That was absolutely not me. I'm actually originally from rural Mississippi, grew up in a small town, started life in pretty deep poverty. My mother was a single mom. She was raising two little girls, trying to make ends meet with only a GED education. She was able to go through a union apprenticeship. She actually trained as a union carpenter. And, that job she describes to this day as the job that saved our lives, and it moved us from poverty to middle-class life. She was able to, have stable wages, benefits, bought our first home. She believed very strongly that education was the pathway for her children, for me, to have opportunity. So I was very blessed to, be able to go to college on scholarship and student loans and Pell Grants. And actually studied, my degree was in microbiology, which is absolutely the furthest away from politics that you can imagine. And I joke, my college roommates, ironically, both of my college roommates left college and immediately went into politics and ran campaigns, statewide campaigns. I never was anywhere near politics, but I'm the only one who has now in politics, 30 years later. And but I had a career. I was able to go on, get a master's degree, a doctoral degree, worked in health policy and public health policy, spent 20 plus years doing that work, working with federal programs, lived overseas. My husband was also active duty Air Force. So we were a military family for a number of years, had some incredible work, career experiences. For me, the real turning point was, I always describe myself up until this point as a very engaged voter, informed voter, certainly having a spouse who was military, being stationed overseas, deployed, we understood the preciousness of voting and our vote and democracy. And in 2016, during the 2016 election, on election night, I really had an aha moment, for lack of a better word. At the time, my third child, my daughter, was only 6 weeks old. And, I was up with her watching the election results and very concerned about what was happening and what that meant for the future of our country, the future for my children. And, I had this very clear moment where I thought, never again will I stay on the sidelines. And so that led me to become more engaged in the political process. And I really knew absolutely nothing about the political side, even though I'd worked on policy, but non-political. And in 2018, the state representative for my district, so I'm here in Franklin County in the suburbs, he decided to run for another office. And I, had never really thought about running for office before, but I thought we need people in the state house, in these, elected positions who are there for the right reasons. They are there to problem solve. They are there to get things done for their communities. And I think I could do that. I don't know why I thought I could do it because I knew nothing about politics, but I raised my hand to run. And so I ran for the first time in 2018. In 2016, that district was won by the Republican by 20 points. By the time I was done in 2018, we ran a real grassroots campaign. We got out there, we knocked on doors, 45,000 doors by the end of the campaign cycle. And I won that seat by 5 points and flipped it. And that started my time in the legislature.
Fantastic. So in 2016, you'd say that personal experience flipped the switch from being a concerned citizen to like, I have to run. and do something?
Yeah. I think there were, especially women between 2016 and 2018, many women stepped up to run for the first time for office. And we saw across the country, if you remember, you might not remember because you're both very young, but in 2018, Congress flipped. We had many state houses that flipped. Actually, here in Ohio, we flipped 6 state house seats that year. I was one of the 6. And a lot of that was because women who had never run for office stepped up to run because of the deep concern that, we had in that first Trump midterm, that first Trump term, which is not unlike what we are in right at this moment. I think actually that intensity is even greater.
Yeah. I mean, we saw that shift, growing up because we both of us grew up in Marysville. It's sort of like a rural town, right? Sort of. We were surrounded by Trump signs. I mean, they were everywhere, So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. We want to go into your legislative service. So what does leadership look like in a supermajority environment where the other side doesn't really need your vote?
Well, it's tough.
Yeah.
I say if you want to learn to develop thick skin, learn how to be smart strategically, learn how to just be tough and have grit. If you didn't already come to it with that, which I did, but be in a super minority.
Yeah.
Because it is not for the faint of heart. And, you're right, because in many circumstances, depending on where our numbers are or the makeup of the majority, because there are divisions among the majority as well, your vote may not be needed. And so one of the challenges, and one of the things I always shared with our members when I was the minority leader is you have to figure out ways to be effective that may not be how you thought when you came here. And so, for example, number one, you have to develop relationships. And that means that you have to have conversations with people and develop relationships and get to know people who you may disagree with on a number of issues. But I feel very strongly that, we do have common values and you can find things that you agree on and ways to work together. So you have to start there because no Democrat in the Ohio General Assembly will be able to pass legislation or get their legislation moving forward without working with a Republican. That is just the reality of how it works for us. But the other thing is you need to know the process and understand how there are different ways in the legislative process. It may not look like passing a bill that has your name on it, but it may look like having parts of your bill, the most important parts of your bill, put into another bill that may not have your name on it, but you're getting it across the finish line and you're doing good and you're delivering for your community. And the other thing, and I think one of the most important things is we are there to serve our communities. And much of the work that we do revolves around constituent services. And that is the thing, no matter if you're in the majority or the minority, you actually do have control over. You have control over how responsive you are to your constituents, how you help them break through red tape, all of the things that make a real difference. And so take that as seriously as your legislative work.
Yeah, I think that's, I think you raised like a lot of great points too. I mean, the one thing some of my friends and colleagues have told me is like the important thing, or one of the important things about politics is just to be visible. You got to be there and you got to be representing your constituents
That's
and
right.
doing things for your constituents.
90% of this work in any form of public service is you have to show up and you have to be present. And if you're not showing up and if you're not present, if you're not in your community having conversations, my door is always open and always has been to everyone, whether they voted for me or not, because I am there to represent the entire district. Not just the people who voted for me, although I'd like for more of them to vote for me. But that is the attitude that you have to take and the shift that you have to take when you go from running for office to actually being in office and serving.
What's something you believed about legislating before you got to the State House that really? What's something that surprised you as?
So my background was, it was in policy, but it was very information-driven, data-driven, logic. You're looking for, if things don't work, how do we correct this so that we can make it work? Implementation of policy, you can pass good or bad policy, but how do you actually make it work when you're implementing it? That was the vast majority of my career before I got into politics. That all goes out the window in the legislative process. I mean, I think you think, people are going to be reasonable and you can reason with them. And sometimes you can. But a lot of, unfortunately, policy legislation, especially in the environment that we have right now in the Ohio General Assembly, is based on emotion and not necessarily facts and logic. And or personal beliefs or personal experiences that may not necessarily translate to everyone's experiences. And so, that was a real eye-opener for me as a new legislator. You think, well, I can just sit down and reason with this person. That is not, sometimes you can, but that is not always the case. You have to understand, and this is where I think the relationships part comes in. You have to understand people's personal beliefs, their relationships, what they are factoring, what pressures they are facing, and then you have to figure out how do we maneuver around that to maybe make legislation less bad, or to, try to slow it down, pause it, all of the things. And so you just learn to be very strategic and maneuver in different ways. And sometimes you have to be super creative about how you do it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, another thing I've been told is you got to meet people where they are.
Yes.
And especially in this climate with rising polarization and emotions are high. Yeah. I feel like if you don't do that, you're never going to be able to make inroads with people.
There have been a number of issues, controversial issues that we have, taken up in the legislature for better or worse. And that is absolutely correct. I mean, everyone, even if you share the same political party, everyone comes to these issues with differing perspectives and experiences. And, my challenge as the minority leader, especially maneuvering in a caucus where people come from different communities, different backgrounds, different belief systems, you have to meet people where they are. And you have to give people the space to be able to talk about their concerns or perspectives without automatically shooting them down because they are not yours. Because you shut people down at that point and you're not going to be able to make any progress. And so you have to sometimes approach these conversations as hard as they may be, because they may be completely different from your opinion on something, without judgment and an openness to listening. I always talk about one of, I think, the most important leadership skills that anyone should bring to the table is the ability to listen and really listen to people. Stop talking and just listen.
Yeah, I guess the other thing too is, do you have any hope for greater bipartisanship going forward in the future? It seems like there's an opportunity in 2026, but at the same time, 5 years ago, I would have thought, it can't get worse. I feel
and
like
it still does.
Yeah.
Well, I am an eternal optimist. And I always have hope. I mean, we can't give up on hope.
Right.
You can't. And it's just not in my nature to give up on hope. I always think that we can move towards something better. And it's, I think it's my responsibility as someone in a public position and in leadership to remain hopeful. But it is challenging. It's becoming more and more challenging. And I think the reason it is becoming more challenging is because we are finding ourselves in these information silos. And so, my belief is being informed by information that I have and experiences that I have, whereas a colleague across the aisle probably has a very different information silo that they are in. And, I certainly think social media exacerbates this. The algorithms on social media exacerbate this.
Big problem.
It's a huge problem. And until we can break those barriers down and move offline into actual in-person conversations, we're not going to be able to overcome that. And that is why, it is so important that we have direct conversations, whether it be with constituents, whether it be with colleagues. You have to be open to dialogue, because 9 times out of 10, when you sit across from someone and you have a real conversation and tough conversations and you listen, you do come to some sort of consensus.
I know James Tallarico of Texas gave an example on some podcast about that too. And it's like, it just reminds me of, if you say good morning to the average person, you're going to say good morning to potentially somebody who just completely disagrees with you, and it's a friendly interaction.
Yeah.
And so it goes to show, like, I think getting offline and then just having dialogue with people can make a big difference.
Well, and what worries me most about, as we talk about this and how do we get out of these silos is, at the same time, we are seeing an increase in social isolation. We see that a lot with young people, young men especially, but also older individuals who, may be isolated in their homes as they are aging, only seeing, certain news broadcasts, only seeing certain algorithms on social media. They are not out of their homes. And, I think it is a big issue that we have to tackle, this issue of social isolation, because it makes this polarization, I think, even worse in this country and in society.
Yeah, absolutely. Next we want to go over the redistricting crisis, because it's obviously a problem here in Ohio, and we're one of the worst gerrymandered states in the country. So, like, if you had to explain the redistricting crisis to a young person that's voting for the first time, how would you do it without sugarcoating it?
Well, the districts have been rigged so that politicians pick their voters. Voters do not pick who represents them. That's the simple answer. They are rigged districts. There's no other explanation for it. And they are rigged for those in power to hold on to power. And it's as simple as that. So it diminishes the power of the people's voice, diminishes the power of their vote, and ultimately it creates an environment where government is not there to serve people, to be transparent to people, to be accountable to people. It is there to be really accountable to no one except those people who fund your campaigns, or, the extreme versions of your side who have the power to actually keep you in office or get you out. And so that creates a very, very unbalanced system where, we, in the case of Ohio, we have a legislature where we see time and time again, a legislature passing policies that are in direct conflict with what the people want and what is in the best interest of even their own communities. And I could go on and on. We saw it with reproductive rights and, continually passing more extreme anti-abortion bills. And of course, the people, when they finally had a voice in direct democracy, overwhelmingly said, no, that's not what we want. We want those rights protected. Cannabis use, availability of legal cannabis. We see it now with the continued attacks on public education and our public schools. And, we know, first of all, 90% of Ohio students attend public schools, and people overwhelmingly support our public schools. And so that is the damage that it does. It also opens up the door for large public corruption scandals. We've had, during my tenure in the State House, the largest public corruption scandal in our state's history. Really, in the country, we were labeled the most corrupt state in the country. So it is, it's bad governing.
One thing I was curious about is your thoughts on, like, the Redistricting Commission's decision to pass the new maps in the process.
Well, let me just start with this. So Ohioans passed redistricting reform through ballot initiative in 2015 and 2018. So 2015, we did our state legislative redistricting process, 2018, our congressional maps. What we now know, and what I know from my tenure on the Redistricting Commission, and I went through 7 rounds of redistricting when I was on that, what we now know is that that process is highly flawed.
Yeah.
And, I would argue it was designed to be flawed. We now note that because of who was involved in the design of it. Because essentially, what the Republicans figured out is if they hold all statewide offices, if they gain control of the state Supreme Court, there really is no accountability in that process to get to quote unquote fair districts. And so we are working with a highly flawed process that we've learned does not work, which is why citizens tried to go to the ballot last year to take politicians out of the process and implement a citizen-led commission. So when I was on the Redistricting Commission and was faced with a vote finally after 7 rounds on state legislative maps, and when the most recent Redistricting Commission and the Democrats on there were faced with the vote, I think it's important to remember you are dealing with a process that doesn't work, and you are dealing with a scenario where you're not choosing between good and bad choices. You're choosing between 2 really bad choices.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to figure out what is the least bad. Can we negotiate to make something a little less bad so we can survive to fight another day?
Yeah, right.
Right. And so I think that is, I don't want to judge the decision that was made about these congressional maps, but that is the reality of what they were facing. You either outright lose 3 congressional seats, or you negotiate a little bit and at least give us a fighting chance to hold on to those 3 congressional seats, which, by the way, in this upcoming midterm could be the difference between gaining the majority in Congress or staying in the minority and there being no check on Donald Trump and his administration.
Right, that makes sense.
And those are the choices. I mean, they're not great choices. Are voters in Ohio, are the people of Ohio getting a shot at fair districts? Absolutely not. And people should be pissed off about that. Right. But they should be pissed off that we have a process that is broken and we have statewide office holders, including a Supreme Court, who have so far refused to abide by what the people wanted and their intent. And so what it says to me, again, and we already knew this, is that we have to change the process so that politicians are not involved at all, that we have a citizen-led process. It will not be perfect, but it will be a hell of a lot better than what we have now.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of great points, and I feel very similar. Just one quick note about the process. It's labeled a bipartisan process, but you can just pass it along partisan lines.
Correct.
So then it's
correct.
I mean, and it's just to me, it's also incredibly inefficient. I mean, so we have all these hearings when at the end of the day, it's just going to get passed along bipartisan lines, and then we're going to have to do it again.
And then you have to do it again, right? And when the process was passed back in 2015 and 2018, there were people who legitimately thought that having to do it again in 4 years would be a disincentive for not getting to some sort of bipartisan commission. Well, we are not operating in those times anymore at all. We're just not operating in a majority party who is at all interested in abiding by the norms, right? And that is the reality of the circumstance that we are in. So, I always say, you want people to fight for you. Absolutely. And I am down for a good fight on principle. But you can't be in a fight and just throwing haymakers. You have to fight smartly because, we have to be realistic about the circumstances that we are in, all of the factors that play here, and be able to fight smartly so that you can at least have a fighting chance to keep fighting and working towards something better. So to me, the real solution to this comes through likely another citizen-led initiative that will happen, probably not this next year, but in the next couple of years, and finally throwing politicians out of this process and getting that across the finish line. That is really the only real solution to this issue.
Yeah, and a lot of people mention, if you go on social media, a lot of people are saying, oh, the new map gives Republicans 2 seats. But again, the 2 seats they're talking about are tend to be like pretty competitive, and I think they are winnable, especially in 2026.
I do too. I believe in Marcy Kaptur's ability, especially in a year like 2026. What we anticipate is going to be a year like 2026 with her history of service. I believe in her ability to hold on to that seat. It is going to be hard as hell, and she is going to be in the toughest fight of her career. I believe in Greg Landsman's ability also to hold on to his seat because of a couple of dynamics, not just 2026, I think, being a more favorable year for Democrats, but also Hamilton County is experiencing much of the shift that we have seen here in Franklin County. So I do believe that there is a pathway and a chance for us to hold on to the congressional seats that we have, the Democratic seats in Ohio. It will be tough. It will be hard. Is it ideal? No. Is it what the people deserve? No, absolutely not. But it does give us a fighting chance. And the alternative is having for sure 3 seats in those districts that would not be winnable for Democrats.
We can go over your campaign for Secretary of State. When you win, what's one reform you'd pursue?
I like that positive sort of when you win.
We're all rooting for you. You know,
Thank you.
What's one reform you'd pursue that won't make headlines, but would meaningfully protect democracy?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think that it is an impossible environment. I think it is an incredibly difficult environment. But I believe ultimately in the power of people to prevail in these circumstances. And if you look over history, that is what history teaches us. That said, none of this is easy. This is hard work. For me, I think the most important thing and responsibility of the Secretary of State, and when I get into office, is you have to restore trust and transparency back to that office. This is an office that has been used to keep people from having full access to the ballot box. This is an office that has been used to trick people into not understanding what they were voting for. It is an office that has been used to sow distrust in our election process because we have a Secretary of State who on one side of his mouth says we have the most secure elections in the country, but on the other side, feeds into this rhetoric from Trump that, our election should be not trusted. And so the next Secretary of State, whose job is to be the primary advocate for voters, period, it will be to restore some of that transparency and trust. And I think it's simple. There are some simple things that can be done to do that. Number one is we have got to be back in a space in that office where we are actually promoting voting and voter participation and voter education and putting real resources and energy towards those efforts. The other part is opening up the process so that people truly understand how it works. And so I hear this, I've been talking a lot to Board of Election staff, people who sit on the boards of elections, and one of their biggest complaints that they have is I wish that people in elected office, and especially in the legislature, understood what we do and what our processes are and why they are so secure and, involve Democrats and Republicans and their checks and balances there. You can go and actually observe those processes. You can go and volunteer. Any citizen can volunteer as a poll worker to understand how our elections work. And so having a Secretary of State who is very focused on restoring that trust, increasing that transparency, I think will be a huge shift.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. Like the current office has, you brought up like they've kind of dabbled in like mistrust in elections.
Yes.
And one thing that like rings to my mind is they made changes to how the like poll workers work the elections. And, I saw they brought back the binder for like identity identification, and some of the workers during these elections, they were telling me like, we want our iPads back. Like we want our electronics back. And it just speaks to me. It's like we've seen political change based on like a manufactured frustration, and it's resulted in inefficient and just ineffective policy.
Right.
And it's not that like election security isn't like a reasonable concern.
Absolutely. Election security, important. You have to make sure that we have secure elections. We want only people who are eligible to vote. We do not want voter fraud.
Yeah.
We all agree on that.
Yeah, of course.
But it is, you're right, sort of this chipping away at the trust to then pass policies and procedures that have the effect of they limit then access to actual eligible citizens to be able to exercise their right to vote. And a perfect example of this is just recently Senate Bill 293 that passed a couple of weeks ago from the General Assembly before we took our break for the holidays. And this Secretary of State actively lobbied for this legislation to be passed. And he's doing it on the premise that is coming from the Trump administration that mail-in voting is full of fraud, which is not the truth. There is no evidence of that. And so to, quote unquote, address that issue, the potential for fraud, they now want to get rid of the grace period that Ohioans have had, as long as your ballot is postmarked on the day before Election Day, the grace period that you have for your ballot to come back to the Board of Elections to be counted. We've previously had 10 days, and then it was whittled down to 7 days. Then last year it was whittled down to 4 days, and now it is at 0 days. And so essentially we're now going to have thousands of ballots, not because there's evidence of fraud and mail-in voting, but now thousands of legally cast ballots, people who did everything right, but simply because of a delay in mail service, will have that ballot thrown in the trash.
Yeah, it's
after
just,
Election Day, right?
It's just insane how, like you mentioned, just like this little chipping away. And yeah, I remember growing up, my parents always telling me like, yeah, some people vote by mail, and like it was very normal to me. So just to see that the trust in mail-in voting just
people
go away.
Love to mail-in vote in Ohio. In fact, more Republicans use it than Democrats. People like to, especially if you are older, you have a disability, you are a student away at school, like to get their ballot in the mail because it's convenient. But you can sit down, you can actually do your research on the candidates, do your research on the issues. You're not rushed. You can take your time, drink your coffee, have a beer, whatever, and and then return it. People like that. And especially though, if you're an older voter, if you're a disabled voter, if you are a college student, I'm a mom to a college freshman, this is the way that you access voting. This is your primary way that you access voting. And so what legislation like this does and efforts like this, the effect of that is you are now creating barriers to voting for many people unnecessarily. Because again, there is no evidence that there is fraud in this process. And in fact, the current Secretary of State in front of committee said it 3 different times. I have it on video, 3 different times, that voter fraud in Ohio is exceedingly rare. Do we want any voter fraud? Absolutely not. But there has to be a balance between how you tackle that issue, which we absolutely should address when it happens, and disenfranchising thousands of Ohio voters who should be able to have a say in their government.
I also want to raise something I saw on your website for your campaign. You talk about like modernizing businesses and technology and stuff for businesses. Like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, great question. So another less sexy part of the Secretary of State's office that a lot of people don't talk about is the business services arm of the Secretary of State. So anytime a new business, a nonprofit establishes themselves in the state of Ohio, they have to register with the Secretary of State's office. And so that is the first step, and you go through that registration process. First of all, I want to say in the state of Ohio, the vast majority of businesses that we have in the state of Ohio are small businesses. And a great number of those are businesses that are less than 10 employees, or they may be sole proprietorships. I imagine even to do this work, you probably had to start a small LLC and you had to register with the Secretary of State, right?
Yeah.
The problem that we have with small businesses, and one of the challenges that small businesses face, is a great number of those small businesses fail within the first year of operation. And a lot of times they fail because lack of support, lack of knowledge about how you navigate things like access to capital, doing things like, how you correctly handle your taxes, a whole number of things that businesses need to be successful in the first year of operation. I think that there is tremendous opportunity through the Secretary of State's office to create better on-ramps to those services and support services, because actually through the state of Ohio, through the Department of Development, for example, we have a number of programs, a number of grant opportunities, but many small businesses and micro businesses have no idea that those resources exist.
Yeah, I'm one of them.
That's right.
That's right. Love for something like that to exist. Yeah,
That's right. So how do we better make those connections between that initial, you come through the front door in the Secretary of State's office and you register your business, to making sure that you are connected to those resources and that you are successful in the first year of operation and hopefully successful for many years afterwards. So that will be a big goal for me as Secretary of State in that particular part of the operations of the Secretary of State. The other thing that I think, connecting that to the voting operations, is there's tremendous opportunity with those new businesses to, one of the other challenges that we have on the voting side is having enough poll workers to operate, not necessarily for large general elections, but every time you have a primary or you have these local elections, recruiting enough poll workers so that people have access to their precinct locations, right? And we don't have to consolidate them into smaller locations. And so how do we better make those connections between businesses that are operating and are registered through the Secretary of State and both recruiting poll workers, but also providing incentives to those businesses, for example, to offer, just like we do for jury duty, a paid day off to work as work the polls. And so I think there are a lot of opportunities there. I think there are also some opportunities, when we talk with our partners in organized labor to address issues like wage theft or improper classification of workers. How do we use some of the information from the Secretary of State to better connect with the Treasurer's office and the Attorney General's office to better address that issue that has plagued, many of our folks who want to be paid properly.
And I think an important thing to point out is like a lot of the things you talk about are things that should be nonpartisan, things that any good intentioned people should be able to focus on passing.
Well, and listen, if I'm being honest, this office, the Secretary of State, should not actually be a partisan office. Because if you think about the administration of our elections, registering businesses, people should feel and know that it doesn't matter if you are Republican or Democrat, or there's a Republican or Democrat serving in this office, that when you go into to cast your vote at the ballot box, your vote is respected. Your choice about an issue is respected. The information that you see in front of you is accurate. It is unbiased. You should trust that that is the case. That should always be the case. It should not matter who Allison Russo, who happens to be a Democrat, if I agree with who you vote for or not, if I agree with what issue you support or not. That should have absolutely no bearing on any of this.
I know there are certain grants, because I come from the film background, film and video, that there are certain grants that, John Doherty, he's the head of film commissioner here in Columbus, that he does a really good job of making sure all those grants get out there to the general public. And, it's very competitive. However, it's just, it's not enough. And
yeah.
as somebody who's running a startup and somebody that doesn't have a lot of capital,
That's
like
right.
that would be amazing.
But
you know?
you are like the vast majority of new business startups in the state.
Yeah.
I mean, so many are in that exact circumstance. And, and this is something I've learned as a state legislator and doing those constituent services. There is a sea of information out there. And it's just figuring out, where can I just get started? You don't know what you don't know. And how can I even get started to know what is available to me? So I think we can do a much, much better job. And there are incredible opportunities to do that.
The next thing we want to talk about is like just the general sense of the future of Ohio politics. Like, we kind of discussed this a little bit earlier, but what sort of opportunities do you see and to move politics to just like a more positive direction? Not only from my perspective as a Democrat who wants to see more Democrats win, but just like I want to see the climate improve, like in general. Well,
first, I think it starts with good people running for office. And people who are there for the right reasons. And they are not there, as a stepping stone to something else or to be internet famous or, to, get all the accolades from a president or to advance special interest. So you need people who are there who actually believe in service. And there are good people. There are absolutely good people who are stepping up, who are in office, who are running for office, who fit that description. So it starts there. But then it is also about, once you get into office, you have to feel like you're accountable for your actions and your decisions. And I always say, people may not always agree with me on how I vote on an issue, the decision that I made, and that is okay. That's fine. But they should expect that I can stand in front of them and explain the vote and the decision. They should expect that. And, if they feel really, really angry about it, they should expect that they can use their vote. And if they have enough of them, to find me something else to do and put someone else in there to do it. And that's how government should work. That's how our founding fathers, that's what they wanted. That's what we should expect. And so, I do have hope that we can move in that direction, but it is going to take a long time. It is going to take, I think, some very intentional strategic change. I think we are at a moment in time right now where there is a tremendous amount of frustration and people feeling like the system is rigged against them, because it is. It is rigged against them. Your ability to have the power of your vote is rigged against you right now. This economy is rigged against the vast majority of people here in Ohio, certainly average Ohioans. It is rigged against them. And I sense a great frustration. And I think, this Republican Party and supermajority has overstepped. I think they have overstepped. And there will be backlash to that. Yeah. And it is coming.
Yeah.
How big 100%. That backlash will be and how far that pendulum will swing, I don't know. But I do see it starting to shift and people realizing this is not working for us. Yeah. And we need something different.
Well, what I truly admire about you is that, you don't shy away from going to these rural areas and these rural communities, because I feel like, especially over the past, 10 to 15 years, a lot of Democrats have sort of hunkered down in their in their cities, and
where you feel comfortable and
safe.
Yeah,
exactly, right.
Yeah.
But people like you and Amy Acton go out to these rural areas, like you were at the Circleville Pumpkin Fest, which was I was there one year. Or Pumpkin Show, sorry, Pumpkin Show. And yes. I was there one year, and I'll tell you what, the year I was there, it was pretty MAGA heavy. But now, since people like you are going into these communities, I saw the shift firsthand. There are people out there that obviously it's, there's still a lot of conservatives in that area, but I feel like, since they see their own politicians in their streets and, seeing people like you meet them face to face, I feel like there's a lot of hope there. And
well, I think this goes back to, I think where we started with this, a lot of this work is you have to show up. And so we have to show up everywhere. You cannot leave certain communities, certain segments of the population ignored, first of all. You have to show up. I think because I grew up in a rural community and I feel very comfortable in those kinds of spaces, but also when I was a military spouse and, being around people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, I feel very comfortable in many different spaces. And so that's part of this is, we have to, as Democrats, we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you have to have conversations that may be uncomfortable, but you need to, that also goes back to what we talked about before. You have to meet people where they are, and you have to be willing to listen and engage. I'll never forget, one of the most meaningful conversations that I've ever had as an elected official. I actually ran in a special election back in 21 for Congress. It was a very gerrymandered district. It covered 14 counties. Knew it was very unlikely that I was going to win. And that was okay. I felt it was important that we run a strong race there. But because of that, I was out in many of these 14 different counties. And I remember having this conversation with this woman. It was in Ross County in a very rural community. She was a small business owner, restaurant owner, likely full-on Republican voter. I'm 100% positive that is how she voted. But as I was talking with her, I said, what is it that you want from someone who represents you, in Washington or elsewhere? And she said, I want to feel like someone is representing me who is going to fight for me and work for me. That's what I want. And, that is what we have to remember. Ultimately, that is what people want. They want to feel like the person who is representing them, whether it be on school board, city council, in Columbus, up in Washington, they want to feel like it is them, their issues, their families, their economic security that you are working for and that you are fighting for. That's what they want to that's what they want to see in their elected representation.
What role do young voters actually play right now versus the role politicians like to say they play? Because I know everybody's frustrated right now, but especially the young people. We haven't gotten a break since high school with the MAGA rhetoric. And so, how important is it that young people go out there and do campaign work or volunteer? I mean, it's almost life and death at this point. We have to get young people involved in some sort of way. So
I think so. First of all, I am a mother of a new voter and a young person who right now is working his way through college. So I feel this very deeply and personally at the moment. I also have, the great privilege. I work with a lot of people in their 20s at the State House, on campaigns. So I'm surrounded by many, many young people. And I think the thing that is most concerning to me is this sense of hopelessness about politics at the moment.
Yeah.
And, feeling like, does it even matter? Does my vote matter? Does my voice matter? Will this make a difference? And, the first thing that I would say is do not give up hope, because politics is what you make of it. And the candidates who get elected are who you choose. The people who run for office and who step up to run for office, that can be you. Maybe not today, but in a few years. And I have great hope in the future generation. Voters and elected leaders and people who are involved in politics, because I see a level of knowledge and engagement and reality that, frankly, I did not have when I was your age. at all. And, but also a sense of responsibility to do better. I have a lot of hope in that. And so the only way that we can translate, those ideals into what your reality is you have to be part of the process. And you have to have a seat at the table. And the most important way that you have a seat at the table is through your vote. And when I hear people say, my vote does not matter, and I say, if your vote did not matter, there would not be so many people in power who are trying to take that vote away from you.
Exactly.
And that power away from you.
On the money.
It absolutely matters. But you have to believe that you matter, your voice matters. You have to pull up that chair, have a seat at the table in the, whether it's simply, being an engaged voter, it's volunteering for a campaign, it's maybe one day running for office, whatever that may look like. Because change will come, but no one's coming to save you. Right? No one's coming to save any of us.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to do that.
Yes.
You have to do that as the next generation. You have to do that. And so don't give up hope, because there's so much potential. I see so much potential in, people in their 20s and their perspective on the world, their perspective on this country. Be a part of the process.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like what's most important is stuff on the local level,
Yes.
on the state level. Like
That's right.
If you really want stuff to change, that's, you got to be out there at every election and vote, because, if you're not putting in your vote, I mean, again, nobody's going to come out there. No angel from the sky is going to come and,
It's equivalent to like a resignation.
Yeah, right.
So what I also love about young voters, and I think your generation, is you've got a very acute sense of inauthenticity and bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
and have the ability to sort through misinformation. Truly, you do. I think you are by and large far better at critical thinking than, I love my generation. I'm Gen X and we get a bad rap sometimes. But because you all, number one, you've had much more information coming at you because of social media, the internet, all of those things. You're much more skeptical of things and people.
Definitely, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I think that makes you also, you just have this acute sense of what is real and what is not real. And I think that's a good thing, especially in politics. That's a good thing.
I guess, is there any final thoughts, like a message to our viewers that you'd like to share?
Well, I think, my final thought is, number one, I hope people understand the importance of the Secretary of State. There will be a lot of attention in this election, as there should be, to the governor's race, to the U.S. Senate race, to some of these congressional races. But really, for long-term sustained change, especially as it relates to democracy, having government that is responsive to you, voting is very critical. And the statewide office that, has such a strong influence on how our election process is carried out, how voters are promoted and advocated for, comes down to the Secretary of State's office. And, so don't forget those other statewide offices. And, and show up and vote. Make sure you're registered to vote. Check your voter registration. It's so easy to do that. Check your voter registration. Be a part of the process.
It was great talking to you. And
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Allison. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.